When I was young, the neighborhood kids used to play dark hide and seek or dark capture the flag, often pretty late at night. Our parents were okay with it as long as we didn't leave the neighborhood. It was the early 90s. We were basically thrown out of the house on the weekends. Anyway, one night after the game was over and everyone had gone home, my stepsister and I were hanging out in our front yard, just sitting on one of those green cable boxes talking. At one point, she stops talking and points into the sky and asks about a light in the sky. I turn and look and see it myself. The light was faint blue and was brighter and bigger than the stars around it. It was moving in ways that seemed impossible, and it became aware we were looking at it as soon as I locked eyes on it. I don't know how to describe that I know that. It was just this immediate feeling that it was looking right back at us. Suddenly, the light moved towards us almost in the blink of an eye. It went from being roughly double the size of a star in the sky to as bright as an airplane or helicopter searchlight instantly. There was no sound, and the light didn't illuminate the surrounding area, which gave it a weird feeling. I tried to say something to my sister, but I found myself unable to speak, and I could suddenly barely move. I just remember turning my head to see my sister looking very scared also, unable to speak or move. I thought I heard a noise and the light started shining on me, which made me turn my head back towards the object, and then I felt a piercing light basically blind me. I was bathed in the blue light. After this, things get a bit hazy, like I was meant to not remember it, even though certain moments are as plain as any memory from that time. I was in a place that was mostly dark, but there were lights that seemed to hover by themselves, with no visible technology, poles, or anything holding them up. I don't know if I was laying down or standing up because there was a feeling of no gravity or downward force in any direction. I remember interacting with an entity that was human-esque, but seemed to be different. Like a beautiful person, but they had no male or female characteristics, completely androgynous, but with very symmetrical and smooth appearance to the face and body, otherwise very human-looking. They talked to me, but I was acutely aware that it was in my head, and not out loud. It was like moments of being conscious with moments of haziness in between. I don't know how to describe it. I was aware that they were doing things to me, but I don't remember what. But I do distinctly remember a piercing device they inserted just behind my ear on my right side. It went pretty deep, but it didn't hurt. It just felt almost itchy for a second, and they told me they were taking a sample and depositing something that would allow them to remotely monitor me for some time. They explained that this was not the first time they had done this to me specifically, and that they would continue to do so throughout my life, and that there were literally thousands of people they were doing this to. It was a scientific study of some kind that they tried to explain to me, but I honestly don't remember the purpose. I was able to ask them a few other things in the moments of being conscious, like where my sister was, and they explained she was having the same thing done to her. I asked them point blank if they were aliens, and they found it humorous and told me they were humans from the future. But I got the distinct feeling that this wasn't the truth. Again, I don't know how to describe why I thought this. It was just a different feeling when they told me this versus the other things they were saying. It felt like a lie or simplification of some kind. After some time of being out of it again, I became aware that my body was bathed in blue light again, and the darkness started to recede, and I was able to see the stars in the sky again. I don't know how long it was before I really understood where I was, but at some point I sorta came to, and realized I was sitting on the grass, next to my sister, in the neighbor's yard about 50 to 60 feet from the original spot. My sister came to almost at the same time. We both immediately looked at each other, and then to the sky, and the light was gone. The sun was coming up. It was then we realized it had been hours. We didn't really talk about what happened. We just felt the need to go inside and go to bed before we got in trouble. It was years later before I ever spoke to my sister about that night, and she remembers much less than I do. She remembers seeing the light, being blinded by it, and then feeling weird, and then waking up beside me. To this day, she has explained it away by us seeing a helicopter in the sky and just falling asleep because we were tired. She won't discuss it beyond that. I honestly had forgotten about this event until 2 years ago, when my wife mentioned that I had a spot behind my right ear that kinda looked like a burn mark or a scar, but also like a pimple mole. She likes to pop things, and was dying to let me let her try to pop it. When she reminded me of it, The memories of the event flooded back into my head, and I was a bit emotional, but agreed to let her mess with it. She tried to pop it, but said nothing came out. It's still there, and looks exactly as she describes it. Kind of like a mole, but also kind of like a scar. I've had MRIs and other scans throughout the years, but nothing has ever shown up, so I have no idea what it is or if anything is inside there. I try to not think of it now, because although I wasn't scared at the time, it is unnerving to think about now. In the spring of 1981, I was married to my ex-husband Paul, and our infant son George was about 4 months old. We lived in a second-floor, 2-bedroom apartment in a suburb of Chicago. We had recently transferred George to his own bedroom and crib from a cradle that was still in the master bedroom. That night, Paul was asleep beside me when I awoke in the middle of the night, aware that I was being levitated above my bed. I stopped rising about 2 feet above the bed. I knew something or some entities had raised my body towards the ceiling. I sensed and then saw 4 short, about 3 feet tall, gray-colored beings with large dark eyes next to my side of the bed, on my left. I got the impression they were male. I felt it was their hands that had raised me above the bed, although without actually physically touching me. There was a very, very bright light shining through my bedroom window. I knew there was a lamppost in the parking lot below, so I thought at first I'd neglected to pull down the shade and close the bedroom curtains. I was quite awake now and realized my predicament. I was floating above my bed, but I could not move the majority of my body. It was as if I were partially paralyzed. I could turn my head and look around and clearly make out details of my bedroom, and I could hear Paul snoring gently on the bed below me to my right. I started to panic and tried to alert Paul to wake him. I discovered I could not make a sound. My throat didn't work. I was immediately concerned for my little son's safety, but I could see from my position that there was no activity in his room. I assumed he was safe and asleep. I glanced at the red LED numbers on my alarm clock. It was 3:30 a.m. I could see the texture of the paint on the wall beside my head and the texture of the fake wood closet doors, the cradle beneath the window. Those images became an anchor in reality for me. I knew I was wide awake because I could see those things so clearly. I began to get the message that I was going to be moved toward the bright light, which was beginning to glow even brighter. I mentally refused to go there, shaking my head violently in that refusal. I feared that if I were dreaming, I did not want to accidentally go through the window and end up dead in the parking lot below. The thought that I must go toward the light and window came upon my mind again. I refused again. I repeatedly thought, I am not going there. I tried to wiggle out of my bondage as I felt my body being tilted, like Frankenstein's monster on his gurney, to a 45-degree angle facing the window. After a few minutes of struggle like this, I got the feeling that I had won the argument. I do not recall going into the light. I remember waking up moments later on the bed. I got up and walked to the window. The shade was pulled down and the drapes were closed. The lamp was on in the parking lot, but it was not nearly as bright as the light I'd seen. My son and husband were both soundly asleep. Of course, I'd heard of alien abductions then, and wondered what had happened to me. It was a very real experience, especially my awareness of the physical surroundings of my room. I had been awake. My husband, of course, never sensed anything was going on at that time. I don't have any bad memories of actually being abducted, and I don't wish to dredge any up either. I'm not sure why I had to be coaxed to go towards the light, or why I thought I had the right to refuse to do so. If they had me under control, they could have simply done what they wanted with me. I am comfortable with the idea that I was almost abducted and willing to leave it at that. Nothing like that had happened before or since to me. To this day, my friends and I believe we had a very brief encounter. A few years ago, my best friend Adam, his girlfriend Aubrey, and myself were having a night out. We'd gone to a friend's house party and stayed there most of the night. I had eaten 3 grams of psilocybin mushrooms. Aubrey had eaten around 1 gram, and Adam passed on them. He stuck to the little flask of whiskey he'd brought. Hours pass, the party flares up, dies down, and flares up again, so we decided to go. I wasn't feeling much from the whole 3 grams. The environment really neutralized the effects for myself. This is a rare occurrence, especially after that amount. Aubrey wasn't feeling much either, so she elected to drive. We're almost home, just on the other side of the town adjacent to ours. Aubrey was starting to feel a little off, as was I. We round a corner doing roughly 35 miles an hour. I'm staring out the window, not saying much. Adam is staring in the same direction, not saying much. And Aubrey is doing her damnedest to stay focused on the road and not join us in staring out the window. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the progressive rock band Explosions in the Sky. However, their exceptional song First Breath After Coma is playing at a pretty high volume as we all sit in silence just enjoying the ride. The music reaches a huge crescendo, beginning at 2 minutes 30 seconds, and right as it reaches its peak. Almost a minute later, all 3 of us feel this pull. Out of the right corner of my right eye, I'm sitting driver's side back seat. I see this blinding white light. Where it was in my vision means it was front and center in hers and in Adam's. Keep in mind, Adam was on absolutely no substances other than a small amount of alcohol. It feels like an eternity passes. Time literally seemed to stop. After the light flooded the corner of my vision, it crept across all of it, and all I saw was a blinding white light, unlike any shade of white I'd ever seen. All of a sudden, time resumes. We're in the car, it's moving, and we haven't crashed or swerved. We had to pull over a few blocks down and process what had just happened. All 3 of us had felt and saw the exact same thing. We felt time stop. We felt ourselves stop and resume breathing. And we all saw the light. They saw where it came from, but they couldn't explain it well. They said it came from the left of the car, really high up, but that it didn't move like things moved. It was there, all of a sudden, then gone just as quickly. That moment was easily one of the most intense of my life. All 3 of us cried a little afterwards. It was such an overwhelming feeling. The thing I neglect to mention, though, that feeling wasn't negative. When I felt myself resume, I sighed the largest sigh you can imagine. All 3 of us took a deep, long breath before we said a single word. We all felt completely content, completely happy and satisfied. The feeling of satisfaction was the deepest I've ever felt. While I've no proof we encountered an extraterrestrial life form, however, our experience fell in line with a lot of other people's, though from what I've gathered, we had one of few positive encounters. None of us have since experienced anything like it again.